Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning into this video in which we'll look at converting units. So when we say units, we're talking about things that we measure in millimeters, centimeters, meters, and kilometers. By the end of this video, you should be able to convert units of length, square units, units of area, and also cubic units, units of volume. So we're going to look at how do we go from millimeters to centimeters and the other way, centimeters to meters and meters to centimeters and so on. So the rule that you need to know is up here. If you're going from a larger unit to a smaller unit, you multiply as there are more of the smaller units. So if you're going from like meters to centimeters, you times. If you're going the other way, centimeters to meters, from a smaller to a larger unit, you divide because there are fewer of the larger unit. So you should know by now that, for example, there are 10 millimeters in a centimeter. So 10 is going to figure in our calculations here. So the rule is if you're going from a larger unit to a smaller unit, you times. So if I want to go from centimeters to millimeters, I times. If I want to go from millimeters to centimeters, I divide. There are 100 centimeters in a meter and 1,000 meters in a kilometer. So if I'm going from meters to centimeters, it's a larger unit to a smaller unit, I times. So all of these red arrows are times and the blue arrows are divide. So this chart will help you convert units. So let's say, for example, I have something like 720 centimeters and I want to convert that to meters. Well, I'm just going to follow my chart here. Centimeters to meters, I divide by 100. So I just go 720 divided by 100 and I get 7.2. So 720 centimeters is the same distance as 7.2 meters. So let's say I wanted to convert 0.962 kilometers into meters. So the chart to go from kilometers to meters, this time I'm going from a larger to smaller unit, I'm going to times by 1,000. So in my calculator, I just write 0.962 times 1,000 and you get 962. 0.962 kilometers is the same distance as 962 meters. So what about if I wanted to do something like this? Now I'm in meters and I want to go to millimeters. So they're 2 away. If I want to go from meters to millimeters, what I'm going to do is times by 100 to get to centimeters and then times by 10 to get to millimeters. 100 times 10 is 1,000. There are actually 1,000 millimeters in a meter. So to do this conversion, I'm going to take 2.33, I'm going to times by 100 to get it into centimeters, and then I'm going to times it by 10 to get to millimeters. So if you go 2.33 times 100 times 10, you should get 2330, 2,330. So 2.33 meters, the same distance as 2,330 millimeters. So what if I change this and I want to convert square units? Let's say I wanted to convert between millimeters squared, centimeters squared, meters squared, and kilometers squared. So can I use these same numbers? Is there still 10 square millimeters in a square centimeter? Well, remember, a square centimeter is this. It's like a square that's 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. The area of this square is 1 centimeter squared. But I know that 1 centimeter is 10 millimeters. So the area of this squared is 10 millimeters by 10 millimeters. So the area of this square, 10 times 10 is 100. It's 100 square millimeters. So it turns out there are not 10 millimeters squared in a centimeter squared. There's actually 100. What it means is when I'm using this chart, if I want to convert to square units, I have to square everything. So if I want to go from centimeters squared to millimeters squared, I now need to times by 10 squared or 100. I've just shown you there are 100 square millimeters in a square centimeter. So let's say I have something like 2.8 square meters. How many square centimeters will that be? Well, it turns out There are 100 centimeters in a meter, so there's 100 squared or 10,000 square centimeters in a square meter. So to go from meters squared to centimeters squared, I times by 100 squared. In your calculator, you can just put 2.8 times 100 squared. You actually get the answer 28,000. So 2.8 square meters covers the same area as 28,000 square centimeters. So the rules for when you divide and when you times, they don't change. If you're going from a larger unit to a smaller unit, as we were here, you still multiply. So what about if I wanted to convert cubic units? Well, that's actually simple. I can use the same chart, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to rub out all of these squares and put a cube, which is to the power of 3. So let's say, for example, I wanted to convert, 1,950,000 millimeters cubed into centimeters cubed. So just as there were 10 millimeters in a centimeter, there were 10 squared or 100 square millimeters in a square centimeter, there are 10 cubed or 1,000 cubic millimeters in a cubic centimeter. So to go from millimeters cubed to centimeters cubed, I don't divide by 10, I divide by 10 cubed. I divide by 1,000. So you can just put this number, 1,950,000, in your calculator and divide by 10 cubed, or 1,000. So it turns out you end up with 1,950. So this number, 1.95 million millimeters cubed, that occupies the same space as 1,950 centimeters cubed. So make sure you remember this, because people always forget that they have to square or cube the conversion factor. They think 10 millimeters in a centimeter means 10 millimeters cubed in a centimeter cubed. No, it doesn't, and I've just shown you why. So draw this chart and use it to do conversions. So there's one conversion I haven't yet talked about, and that's hectares and meters squared. So it turns out a hectare is 100 meters by 100 meters. That's what the definition of a hectare is. So 1 hectare is 100 times 100, 10,000 meters squared. But what about in kilometers? Well, I know that 100 meters is 0.1 or 1/10 of a kilometer. So it turns out 1 hectare is 0.1 times 0.1, which is 0.01 kilometers squared. A hectare is 1/100th of a square kilometer. There are 100 hectares in 1 square kilometer. There are 10,000 meters squared in a hectare. So we can make a little chart here. So there are 10,000 meters squared in a hectare. So a hectare is bigger than a meter squared. So if you're going from a smaller unit to a larger unit, you need to divide. So to go from meters squared to hectares, you divide by 10,000. So I just told you as well that there are 100 hectares in a kilometer squared. So we're once again dividing because we're going from a smaller unit to a larger unit. A kilometre squared is much bigger than a hectare. So to go the other way, if we were going from kilometres squared to hectares, we just times by 100. Hectares to metres squared, we times by 10,000. How easy is that? All right, very last thing we're going to do is we're going to compare some quantities. So we're going to calculate which is largest out of these four, which would occupy the largest area because they're all units of area. So to do this, it would be easiest if we first convert them to the same unit. So how about we convert everything to, say, centimeters squared? So from the chart, to go from meters squared to centimeters squared, you times, because we're going from a larger unit to a small unit, you times by 100 squared. So putting 0.81 times 100 squared in the calculator, we get 8,100. 0.81 meters squared is 8,100 centimeters squared. This is already in centimeters squared, so we don't need to change it. Let's convert this to centimeters squared. Well, the way we go from millimeters squared to centimeters squared is we divide by 10 squared or divide by 100. So 81,000 divided by 100 gives us 810 centimeters squared. So now let's put this number in centimeters squared. So first, we times by 1,000 squared to get it into meters squared. So if I put this big number times 1,000 squared in my calculator, I get 0.081 meters squared. So make sure you get the right number of zeros. There are 7 there. Okay? So then to convert it to centimeters squared, remember the way we go from meters squared to centimeters squared is we times by 100 squared. So if I put that in my calculator, if I do 0.081 times 100 squared, I get 810 centimeters squared. So it turns out this, and this are all the same. B, C, and D all occupy the same area of 810 centimeters squared, but this first one here, it's 8,100. It is clearly the largest. So this would occupy the greatest area. All right, thank you so much for tuning into this video. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.